נעשה את זה אחרת.
דלית.
כן, איך אני עושה
את מקליטה כבר, אני רואה שאת בתיעוד.
כן, כן.
רק פעם הבאה, לא להיום, אבל פעם הבאה בשם תכניסי רק את התאריך, אני אכניס...
לא, אני עושה את זה אחר כך.
סבבה.
דוד הראה לי איך לעשות את זה בסוף.
זה בסדר
מה את אמרת?
בסדר שאני אתחיל?
רגע, שנייה. דלית, מה אמרת?
לא, אז שאלתי עכשיו נגיד שליאורה רוצה לדבר וגשי קלסנג וואנגמו רוצה לדבר, אז אתה כל פעם פותח להם את המיקרופון?
לא, אז תהפכי את גשמה גם לקורסט וגם את ליאורה תהפכי לקורסט.
אז רק רגע. אוקיי, וליאורה. אוקיי, אז עכשיו זה בסדר?
לקראת סיום השיעור, תשחררי את כולם כדי שיוכלו להיפרד וכו'.
כן, זה ברור.
אוקיי, סליחה מכם.
Hi, Geshema.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you this evening again. I'd like to remind you that we have the text of the teaching in our website. Also, we record this session as well as the previous ones. So if you want to go over the teaching, very recommended. Also, I'm sorry that I have to repeat it every week, but I was told to do so. So our way of showing our appreciation to the teacher is by open our hearts and as generous as we can be, donate in our PayPal or transferring to the bank. The details will be shown shortly. Also, you can see it in our website on the page, the bottom of the page through which you entered the session. So thank you very much for your generosity so far, and as much as you can, if you can, please do so. If it's difficult for you at present, please feel good about it, not donating, just be happy that we are so lucky to have this precious teaching. Thank you, Geshema, so very much.
Okay, thank you, Leora. All right, let's start. Sorry, I was a little late. Anyway, as usual, we start with some breathing meditation, followed by setting the motivation for the session. As usual, visualize in the space in front of you the embodiment of enlightenment, Buddha Shakyamuni, appearing in the form of a fully ordained monk. And surrounded by all the great masters who practiced Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings and attained different realizations. The the masters of the Nalanda tradition of India, all the other great masters who followed Buddha Shakyamuni from India. And the Tibetan masters. And those of the other traditions. Just try to feel their presence in the space in front of you. Showing us that we can practice the teachings in the same way as they can. And for whose purpose? For the purpose of all sentient beings who are surrounding us. Think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings in their different forms. Who have the same mind in terms of its actual nature as the Buddha himself. And like us, they all have the potential to become a fully enlightened Buddha. But like us, they're prevented from reaching that state for now due to the basic misapprehension of reality. Giving rise to endless suffering. So fast generate sense of affection, warm-heartedness, feeling of closeness towards all these sentient beings, making no exception. And that affection or affectionate love then gives way to great compassion. The wish that all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. And not just that, but also the wish, may I be able to protect each and every sentient being from suffering and the causes of suffering. And that wish then turns into the determination. That is the special altruistic attitude, thinking, I will do whatever I can to help sentient beings to be free from suffering and its causes. Since realistically we can only be effective enough to lead all sentient beings out of samsara once we become enlightened ourselves, now generate the mind of enlightenment. That is the determination. I will become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So that I be able to effectively teach them the way to enlightenment. It is with this motivation that I also study Chandrakirti's text, in order to enhance my wisdom. So with this motivation, let's recite the prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then directed at the front visualization. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to great enlightenment. Okay. All right. Well, for this coming week, we've got to a point in the text where Chandrakirti tells us, well, the Buddha did use words such as mind only, but what he meant, of course, was that the mind is primary. The mind is the one thing that we can say is mainly responsible for all our experiences, positive or negative. And in that way, well, being responsible for all positive and negative, it's the one thing that we really need to learn about to understand better. One way is to study the Dharma, of course, but more important is our own experience, mindfulness of our own mind. And of course, to learn to control our own mind. And that should be definitely for this week, to remind yourself over and over again, well, first of all our experiences, whatever we experience, positive or negative, although it seems others are responsible, and of course, this doesn't mean there's not responsibility coming from the outside, but mainly our experiences are mainly the result of our own mind. And so it's most important to change our own mind. That should be our main emphasis. And then, of course, change the situation as it seems necessary to benefit, of course, also other sentient beings. But also to understand the one thing we really can change is our mind. That's the only thing. Of mind and body, we can change our mind a lot more. We can subdue our mind. We can learn to control our mind. To that degree, we could never learn to control this body we have right now. So to be aware of that again and again, whatever experiences we have throughout the week, throughout this coming week, to become aware, this comes from my own mind. This is due to actions I've accumulated in the past. And of course, as His Holiness has mentioned during one of his last teachings, that doesn't mean that we're stuck in some kind of karmic waist, like a what do you call it, straitjacket. We're not stuck in some kind of karmic straitjacket, but karma is something fluid in the sense it refers to actions, of course, and actions change. And if we apply the right actions, if we perform the right actions, mainly of mind, then our situation will change. It may take some time, may not change right away, but it's all to do with changing our own mind. And of course, with regard to that, most important is to generate love and compassion for ourselves, but also for other sentient beings. So as we've done in the meditation, to repeat that over and over, and of course to end up with the mind, finish these kind of steps with generating the mind of enlightenment again and again. So understanding it's all in our own mind, it's all in our own hand. It's all in our own hand in the sense that we can learn to control the mind, generate more love and compassion, but to be aware of this role that our mind plays, especially this week, all our experiences. And we're not saying it's mind only, but as I said in one of the earlier classes, we're not moving away from the Chittamatra school with regard to the Prasangika. So the Prasangika doesn't move away from the Chittamatra as much as we may think. Because in the end, although the external world is conventionally existent, but that doesn't mean that our mind plays a huge part in it. We'll discuss this further today, but I would like you to really focus on that. Remind yourself, every experience you have, remind yourself, your mind is the creator of the situation. Okay. And of course, not neglecting the practice of bodhicitta, that should still be in the forefront, but by now there's not much that needs to be said about it, except of course to also make sure your bodhicitta is always induced by great compassion and by the determination, I'll do something, I'll do my best to remove sentient being suffering. Okay, so that's for next week. And then there were a few questions that I got. Actually, Iki sent me a question weeks ago. My apologies, Iki, for that. I totally forgot. And then Dalit very kindly forwarded me his question again so I can finally answer it. I forgot. Anyway, so his question is, he says that he is reading, or he read Geshe Tsering's book, Relative and Ultimate Truth. So anyway, his books are really, really good. They're very precise. They're very good books to read. They're not that long. If you don't want to go through a really long book, but they're really to the point. So incredibly good books. Any book by Geshe Tsering, and you can easily find them when you Google them. Anyway, so the book Iki read was on the True Truth. I think it's called Relative Truth, Ultimate Truth. And here Iki says, well, Geshe Tsering says, mind by definition is clear and knowing. So does that mean the seat you're sitting on is clear and knowing? Well, really, it's in the context here of actually saying this is what the Chittamatra school doesn't accept. So the Chittamatra school, and we've discussed this before, mind only. Mind only, the word only, of course, doesn't negate anything but mind. The Prasangika doesn't negate that anyway. We've heard what it means and we'll discuss it further today. But also the Chittamatra school, well, they don't say there's nothing but mind. They say there are tables, there are forms, there are colors. They accept the existence of all that. However, they don't exist external to the mind. That's the difference to the Prasangika saying, yeah, tables, cars, conventional phenomena, they all exist. However, some of them exist external to the mind. Okay. But if someone were to think, well, there really is just mind, that's what mind only means. If someone were to use that term and well, interpret it literally, and literally take it to mean there's only mind, that would mean the seat you're sitting on is consciousness. And that would mean it is clear, as in like anything can appear to it, and it's knowing, it has the ability to know its object, it is aware of an object. Well, the seat you're sitting on doesn't do that. So therefore, that's not what the Chittamatra school means. And it's in that context that Geshe says, well, if that's really what it meant, it would mean that the seat you're sitting on is clear and knowing. And would that mean that the Chittamatrans have no friends and no possessions? No, because it's more than just mind. There's also possessions. There are friends. Okay. And then Iki goes on to say, well, so this is one statement Geshe makes, and then later he explains the refutation of external objects, and he emphasizes at the end, Geshe. So what does Geshe say? He says, that does not mean the thing is just in our mind, but things only exist when consciousness apprehends them. Okay, so that does not mean the thing is just in our mind, but things only exist when consciousness apprehends them. Now, I didn't look it up, but I suppose what he meant when he said that was saying that doesn't mean things are just made up. That doesn't mean just as the horns of a rabbit or flying cows are just in our mind, so are tables and cars and so forth. He says that doesn't mean they're just in our mind, but things only exist when consciousness apprehends them. So Iki says the later quote is confusing because it sounds like the Svatantrika, the Svatantrika Madhyamika idea of things, when they say something can only exist when it's apprehended by mind. Well, yes, there is this similarity, but that doesn't mean just because they both assert that things are just in our mind, both assert that it's not the case that things are just in our mind, we just make them up. There is a reality, there are things that accord with reality and some things that don't accord with reality, or there are non-existences. They do both accept that, and both accept, so the Chittamatrans and those following the Svatantrika Madhyamika school, they both assert that things only exist when consciousness apprehends them, but then their assertions are quite different. So, well, the Svatantrika Madhyamika, as many of you know, is one school between Chittamatra and Prasangika. So the highest school is the Prasangika, the second highest school is called the Svatantrika, and then the third highest school is called the Chittamatra. Highest just in the sense how close their philosophical ideas are to reality. So the Svatantrika, and let's follow here Baba Vivekas, like he's the one of the Svatantrika masters. They accept external phenomena, but they say something can only exist if it appears to the mind. So that is different to the Chittamatra school, where they say, well, things have to appear to the mind because they're of one nature with the mind and they arise from imprints and so forth. So that's quite different, which is why, therefore it's different what Geshe says here. The sentence here, although both would accept this, but they accept it in different ways. Okay, all right, that's one part. And they also, so they say the ultimate nature, the Chittamatra school would say the ultimate nature of a chair is that it doesn't exist externally. That it doesn't exist without the ripening of imprints, for that matter, as like a separate entity from the mind. The Svatantrika would say, well, it doesn't exist truly, it doesn't exist. So the emptiness of the chair would be, although it exists externally, but it only exists because it does appear to the mind. So it has to appear to the mind. If it didn't appear to the mind, it couldn't exist. So there's a slight difference there. So although both say it's subjectively existent. All right. I hope this part is clear. You can answer, of course, ask again. And then he goes on to state, but I still don't have the answer to Geshe-Tashitseri's question. That's the second part of Iki's question. So Iki asks, does that mean the seat you're sitting on is clear? Knowing? Oh, no, sorry, that's still Geshe-Tashitseri. So that part of the question. Does that mean the seat you're sitting on is clear and knowing? So if you believe mind only means there's only mind, then everything becomes mind. And if everything is mind, then it has to fulfill the definition. So the chair has to be mind, and therefore clear and knowing has to know its object, and that would be absurd. So Iggy asks, as far as I understand, if two things, so it's the object and the mind, are of one nature, as the Chittamatra school accepts, either they're equivalent, okay, whatever is one is necessary the other, or one is a part of the other, and or the one is an example of the other. Okay, so generally, yeah, if you leave aside the Chittamatra school, if you take phenomena, like how do they relate to each other? In the Chittamatra school, of course, they say mind and its object are of one nature. They are one nature. They're not like separate objects. You can't separate them. And if you leave the Chittamatra, leaving that aside, all the other philosophical schools, they would also say, well, there are some phenomena, they're of one nature. They're connected in a certain way that they're inseparably linked, in the sense that you can't have one without the other, roughly speaking. And that usually means either they're equivalent, right? Like they have different terminologies to describe them, but they actually mean the same thing. So of course, then you can't separate them. If you have one, you have the other. Okay. Or one is a part of the other. So whatever characteristic I have, my impermanence, changing moment by moment, that is a characteristic I have. It cannot be separated from me. Okay. Or thirdly, it's an example of me. So something it's an example. So yesterday's me is an example of me in general. Again, you can't separate that. Me and yesterday's me, I mean, that'd be incomplete without all the different instances of me. So in that sense, you can say those three relationships are given. Two things have that relationship. They're inseparably linked in the way I just described. They're one nature. Very important concept in Buddhism. We've already discussed it, but just for the sake of answering this question. Okay. Now, how about consciousness and its object? They're of the same nature. Which one of those three are there? Well, to say the object is part of the mind, that would possibly be all right. But actually, there is a specific way in which the Chittamatra school says, if two things arise from the same imprint, they're of one nature. So their way of describing being of one nature relates back to the imprints, and that's very unique in the Chittamatra school. So mind and its object are of one nature, mind, which means the mind that perceives the chair, the eye consciousness perceiving the chair, and the chair. Okay, those that arise at the same time. I'm not talking about, by the way, a mind that later on remembers the chair. In the Chittamatra school, they don't say the mind that later on remembers the chair and the chair exists at the same time and arise from the same imprint. They don't say that, because in order to remember the chair, you must have perceived the chair with an eye consciousness previously. So the imprint had already ripened for the appearance of the chair, for the eye consciousness perceiving the chair. And so therefore, when you remember later on that same chair, well, then you're remembering something that has already come into existence. So it's not like every mind that perceives something, its object has to exist at the same time. This is true for sense consciousnesses in the Chittamatra school. So talking about sense consciousnesses, strictly speaking, the eye consciousness perceiving the chair and the chair arise from the same imprint, so they're one nature. And so Iggy then asks, if object and the mind that perceives the object are one nature, it does not explain why the objects are not clear and knowing like the subject, which is of course absurd. Okay, well, just because they're of one nature doesn't mean one has to be the other. Like I said earlier on, my impermanence and I myself, we are of one nature. My impermanence is inseparably linked to myself. They're one nature. But that doesn't mean my impermanence is a person. It doesn't mean my impermanence is a nun, just because they're inseparably linked. So likewise, just because the chair is inseparably linked, is of one nature with the mind, that doesn't mean the chair has to be clear and knowing, doesn't mean the chair has to be a mind. There's just a one nature. Okay, my hand, my arm, and me as I exist right now are of one nature. But my arm is not me, as it's not a person, and I'm not an arm. Okay, so if two things are inseparably linked, that doesn't mean that one is necessarily the other. Okay. So I hope I've answered that question. If I didn't, Iggy, you're welcome to ask again, right? And then Jimmy, I wanted to address also a question from Jim, or Jimmy, I think it's Jim. All right, so he's talked about similarity of experiences. I hope I've, oh, there's something about how to affect the appearance. Oh no, there's a question before that. So he's already last time asked about, or well, I've addressed this one questions, they've all been sent to me together. So last time I addressed this idea of appearances versus being labeled. So things appearing to the mind, sometimes talking about the existence of things. For instance, in the three principal aspects of the path, Lama Tsongkhapa uses the words appearances. And sometimes you have words saying, well, being merely labeled. So how do those two relate? And we discussed this last time. Which one comes first? Egg, chicken, egg question. Do some appearances, are they influenced by the way we label things? I would say yes, definitely. And likewise, the appearances, again, affect how we label things. So it goes both ways. But here he also asks further, oh yes, how can we affect the appearances? Can we actually affect the appearances? Like towards the end of the question, he says, like, if I were to think of an evil monster again and again, would at some point this evil monster start appearing to me? Well, and he says, yeah, I think it would. And I would agree with him. If you again and again think of this monster again and again and again, but that doesn't mean there actually conventionally is a monster. So it's really important. It's not as easy to say, oh, if you think of something again and again, does that become reality? It can. It can. So in the sense, definitely from one life to the other. For instance, well, the classic example is tantric practices. If you do certain tantric practices on the generation stage and later on also, of course, completion stage, so visualizing again and again a pure environment, etc., well, that can have an effect on you perceiving things that way, and that actually being in accordance with reality, to have a pure vision. But even without going into any advanced practice like that, well, mainly, of course, our mental actions affect our appearances. Our mental actions, like karma, the law of karma is really such that actions we perform, of course, we talk about body, speech, and mind, but let's face it, whether an action of speech and body is virtuous or not mainly depends on the mind. So the focus is again on the mental consciousness, on the mind. And so whatever thoughts we have, whatever thoughts, whatever mental processes take place on a daily basis, they all affect our appearances. Okay, and we've talked about this also towards the end of last class, and we'll continue with this today, that Chandrakirti explains, someone's got their, someone's unmuted. Could you please mute yourself? Could you just all check whether you're muted or not? Please make sure you're muted. Someone is unmuted.
Joyce, can you please unmute mute yourself?
Delete, you muted Geshe. Geshe, you are muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize. Okay. All right. So therefore, therefore, with regard to them, as Chandrakirti has, well, we've gone through it last time, we'll continue today with this, that all as sentient beings, all our experiences are the result of our own actions. The environment we live in, so the world we live in, that is the result of our collective actions. So not just my own personal actions, but the actions of other people. But my own personal experiences, me as a person, the mental experiences I have, they're mainly dependent on my own actions. So therefore, karmic actions definitely affect all our appearances. But now he's asking, if I again and again, like through mantras or reaffirmations, again and again, I tell myself there's a ghost or whatever, I think it can actually lead to some kind of wrong appearance of a ghost. I don't think it would actually change our sense consciousness, especially in this life. So that's important, that our sense consciousnesses, we're born with them. They have a certain capacity. They may, of course, get affected by our sense faculty, our eyes degenerating as we grow older. They're no longer, well, they don't really work as well as they used to, and our other sense faculties. So they're all slightly what was the word, degenerating or just losing their ability to perceive things as clearly as early on. But I don't think we can really affect our sense consciousnesses to such a degree that we start seeing things differently. In a future life, that's possible as a result of course, our actions. We may be reborn in a Preta realm, for instance, or a celestial realm, and water no longer appears as water, but it appears as pus and blood, for instance. So that's different. But just in this life, to actually change our sense perception, I don't think that would really work. Unless it's a wrong appearance possible. But I don't even know, do we have these wrong perceptions of like a monster in front of us on the level of a sense consciousness, or is it the mental consciousness kind of adding stuff to our perception? So all in all, I don't really know, but I do think that it can in the long term definitely affect our appearances. So it all comes from the mind, of course. My mind is primary. And he also has this question, and I talked about last time, the similarity of experiences. So he says, when we say we have similar experiences, how is that actually correct to say that? How can we talk about similar experiences when we don't know what the other person experiences? And he's got a good point there. So is there an objective reality? Well, first of all, there isn't. Of course, there is no objective reality. We talk conventionally of an objective reality. We use the term in a conventional sense, in a day-to-day sense, in the same way as we talk about independence on a day-to-day level. We can talk about this independent country or independent decision, but in actuality, there's no absolute independent and there's no absolute objective. But we can still say, well, let's look at the situation objectively. I mentioned that before. So, but in the end, it's all subjective. But can I actually know what another person knows? Yes, I can. I can if I have developed certain, well, if I've developed shamatha, or calm abiding, a special ability to concentrate. Based on that, I can actually generate higher perceptions, as they're also called, some kind of clairvoyant abilities to know another person's mind. I can actually perceive another person's mind. In that way, I can get a sense of what the other person is thinking, what the other person is feeling. To a certain degree, I don't know how far it gets. A Buddha, of course, would know it in the whole scale of thoughts and ideas and so forth. But other beings, it's possible to have, through meditation, to have these abilities. And bodhisattvas, His Holiness will teach a text, Lama Atisha, Joe Atisha's text, Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, on July 13th and 14th. And in this text, it actually mentions that bodhisattvas, there are a few verses on this, bodhisattvas should develop higher perceptions. It's important to have it, to benefit other sentient beings. So they use this only for the benefit of others. So they definitely experience, therefore, And I believe we have a lot of examples of great masters even now that have the abilities to know our minds and to say things accordingly. I mean, it's just, you can't have that many coincidences that lamas give you instructions on something you're fearful about, and something thoughts you have or whatever. So there are plenty of examples. Therefore, the ability to know another person's mind, there you can know that to a certain degree what the person is thinking. But we don't even have to go that far. We don't have to go that far. When I say we have similar experiences as humans, that also means how our body reacts to water, for instance. I mean, obviously, we can observe other people moving in water, drinking it, and using it to refresh themselves. Well, the reaction we have to water is not the same as a preta being. As an example, passing blood, something disgusting, definitely not something that refreshes them. So to be aware, we live in this world as humans where we share a lot of similar experiences. Of course, I never know what the other person, not having clairvoyance or anything, so I don't know what the other person really experiences, but we can exchange, like that we find it refreshing to go into water or to drink it when we're thirsty, and eating certain foods, that we can eat similar foods, whether we like them or not. Of course, on the very subtle level, there are differences, but that we share similar experiences, I guess we can, I think we can be sure that's the case. All right. Anyway, those are the questions I want to address today. So let's go back to the text. That was a little longer, but yeah, I neglected. There's one question by Iki. Such a long time, so I took a little bit more time. And actually what I want to give you today, because we're almost done with the Chitta Matra, it goes to verse 97, but it's pretty straightforward. I'd like to give you a summary, just to go over quickly, just to not very long, what we've done so far. So just to not lose sight of why we're talking about the Chitta Matra, in what way it's important, especially since then Chandrakirti says why the Chitta Matra is taught. In 2 or 3 verses, he actually addresses that. So before I continue with the last verses, well, we won't probably not finish the whole of it, but anyway, before we'll finish this particular part of the text, where did it start off with? Well, the 6th chapter pretty much starts with saying things are not, they don't arise from themselves, or they have not been caused by an inherently existent cause, I should say. Well, don't exist, well, let me reformulate that. Phenomena are produced by a cause, yes, and permanent phenomena have a cause, but that cause is not the same as themselves, and is not inherently different either. So that was the discussion we've had. And then, based on that, we also talked about the true truth. And thereafter, Chandrakirti mentions, well, also in terms of giving rise to something in the future, especially our actions now, or karmic actions now, giving rise to future experiences. Again, that doesn't happen inherently, but it's this process of the action stopping, the having ceased of the action. Well, that continues on. It leaves something in our mind. Well, this being ceased of a karmic action, that remains, and that holds the potential for future experiences. So we don't need a foundational consciousness. The idea of the Chitta Matra school with all these solid inherent imprints that need to be kept in a special mind. No, the Kelsang school doesn't assert that. So it's based on that we start discussing the Chitta Matra school. You all know by now, no external phenomena, things appear to the mind, they're mere appearances, but they don't exist external to the mind. And we had different examples for that. So the Chitta Matra school, I should also mention, of course, saying, okay, external phenomena cannot be found to exist the way they appear. They come to that conclusion, similar to the Prasangika school, but they don't therefore conclude phenomena don't exist inherently. No, they say they don't exist externally. There are no external phenomena, and there's only mind only mind, in the sense that they're just appearances to the mind, and although they don't exist externally, they exist inherently, and mind does too. All right, so that's the main kind of discussion here. Mainly the Prasangika, refutes this idea of external existence, no external existence, and inherent existence. And the first verses, though, initially it starts off with verse 39 to 71, it focuses on the mind itself. Just mind itself, in the sense that mind as the perceiving entity. There cannot be such an inherently existent consciousness with no external objects. Okay, the whole refutation is about that. So it starts off with the examples, different examples, the dream example, the Chittamatra saying, well, the mind is really there, the dreams are not there. While the Prasangika school says, well, no, that doesn't make sense, because a dream consciousness cannot exist inherently, since it still depends on things. That's one reaction. So therefore, things are dependent on each other. Nothing can exist inherently, neither the dream mind nor the objects. And so forgetting about the dreams, just in awakened state, while you're awake, mental consciousness can't exist inherently. It's dependent on many different things. Then also the example of the floaters. Again, the Chittamatra says, well, there's really mind, but the objects, those hairs that appear, they don't really exist. So that's an example for mind exists inherently and there are no external objects. And again, Chandrakirti argued similarly, well, you need an illness, again, to have this appearance to the mind, like this appearance of floating hair. So again, the mind is dependent on something. Otherwise, even a healthy person would have those appearances. And the Chittamatra school insisting, well, no, it does depend on something, but it depends on imprints. And Chandrakirti shows, well, imprints, neither imprints that exist in the past, in the present, or the future can in any way create a mind. Okay, so in terms of the 3 times, we discussed that. And then the Chittamatra school again makes the statement that there are no external existence. So this is already verse 62, 64. Again, there are no external phenomena, and therefore it's just the ripening of imprints. And Chandrakirti reacts with saying, well, how about a person blind? Why they're awake? They cannot. There's no ripening of an imprint to see blue, but when they're sleeping, they can still dream of the times when they could see. So then imprint ripens while they're dreaming. So if the Chittamatra school, if it's not like in the Prasangika school that there are conventionally external phenomena in their eyes that are working or not working, well, how do you explain that? Either you can perceive blue even while you're awake. Why shouldn't the imprint be ripening, even if you're blind? I mean, what makes that person blind if it's just dependent on imprints ripening? Or likewise, you would have to say, well, then if a blind person doesn't perceive blue, an imprint for blue is not ripening, well, they shouldn't dream about it either. So that's one argument they present. And implied, I also said, well, you can also ask questions such as, what's the difference between a correct consciousness and a wrong consciousness in the Chittamatra school? If it's just the appearance of imprints, how do you determine a consciousness is right or not? It's just an appearance of something. So if I perceive it this way and another person perceives it differently, how can I say one person is wrong and one isn't? In the Prasangika school, you can still say, of course, if the appearance of what actually appears to you is in actuality a rope and not an actual snake, and if then you perceive a snake, well, that's a wrong consciousness, because we can investigate, does that object exist that way or not? But if it's just different imprints ripening, well, we may be dreaming the same dream, we may be dreaming a different dream. Okay, anyway, so those questions will arise. So then the discussion goes back and forth between them. And anyway, again and again, so what does Chandrakirti say over and over again? Well, the mind is dependent on other things. So whatever mind you have, it's always dependent on something. So how can you insist on it being inherently existent. So you may actually have a sense, well, Chandrakirti is repeating himself, but in a way, well, he does bring things up again and again, also with repetition, but it's a form of meditation. So don't forget that this text is meant to be actually meditated on, and to remind ourselves in slightly different scenarios, as in like addressing this, addressing that. Things are interdependently existent. I mean, they're dependently existent. Or interdependently existent, whichever way you want to look at it, but they don't exist independent. So inherently it doesn't make sense. Really, it's just meant to remind ourselves, because we are the ones holding on to inherent existence. Here, the Chitta Matra, whether they exist or not, Chandrakirti is really addressing us. By way of, well, saying if we in any way feel there's certain aspects of the Chitta Matra school that seem right, well, look at it again. Anyway, then in verse 70, 71, the Chitta Matra school talks about, well, what about someone meditating on foulness, meditating on phenomena all around us? Like, for instance, the specific meditation, it's a specific meditation on foulness or unattractiveness, as it's called, where you visualize everything around you is covered in skeletons. If there's very strong attachment, of course, you're not actually in accordance with reality here, you're just conjuring up. And this would also be in terms of Jim's question. So through again and again visualizing the whole grounds are covered in skeletons. It's not the eye consciousness, at least not at this initial stage. If you start in this life meditating on this, you wouldn't perceive all the grounds covered in skeletons with your eye consciousness, but mentally you do have that appearance. So in answer to his questions, can that actually affect our perception? So you actually perceive everything in that way, and it has a powerful effect on attachment. It seems like, well, we're adopting a meditation that actually takes us away from reality, but that's actually permitted. I mean, Tonglen, visualizing you're taking on the suffering of all sentient beings and give them all your happiness, that's not realistic, but it's really effective. And so it's permissible to consciously generate certain wrong perceptions. So anyway, mentioned here, this is mentioned, and the Chitta Matra school says, well, again, these appearances, they don't exist, but the mind really does. And again, Chandrakirti goes back and says, well, no, this is all dependent on the mind. It's dependent on karma. It's dependent on so many factors. How about the preta beings and so forth? So going back and again, reminding the Chitta Matra of dependent existence or dependent arising. All right, so this was up to verse 71. We talked about the mind, mainly mind as that which perceives an object. But now the refutation, starting with verse 72, it revolves around now, well, impermanent phenomena. So mind, of course, also an impermanent phenomenon, but here impermanent phenomena seen from the perspective of being objects. So mind itself must also be an object. So mind itself must be an object. And so therefore, being an object, sorry, I forgot to switch this off. There's some message that keeps coming. Anyway, so with regard to mind itself, well, it's also an object. So it must have another mind that perceives it, a mind that perceives it and whose imprints are responsible for that mind to exist. Because that's not just true for phenomena such as chairs and tables and so forth. They only exist because there's a mind that perceives them, and the mind's imprints then being responsible for its appearance. The same must be true for anything. So also for the mind itself. Mind itself must also be perceived by another mind, and it's the imprints of that mind that are responsible for the existence of that mind. That's what the Chitta Matra school says. And that would be the self-knower in the Chitta Matra school of reflexive awareness. And we just recently talked about it. It's still fresh, I guess, in your mind. All right, so our own system saying a mind cannot know itself, cannot do that. We have all these examples an acrobat cannot sit on his own shoulders. Fire does not burn itself. Eyes do not look at themselves. Light does not illuminate itself, and so forth. While the Chittamatra school keeps insisting, no, there must be a self-knower. And the verses, they approach more the ultimate. They're more from the ultimate perspective. Chandrakirti's verses, they address this idea, well, if the mind exists inherently, then the idea of a self-knower doesn't make sense, because why does the Chittamatra school talk of self-knowers? Well, it's because it enables us, they say we remember that we've seen something. Okay, that every time you perceive an object, like for instance a chair, that eye consciousness perceiving the chair must also be known by another mind, by a self-knower. And so therefore, later on, when you remember not only the chair, but also remember that you saw a chair, that's only possible because there was this reflexive awareness, that self-knowing mind that knew the eye consciousness. So it was aware of the eye consciousness being aware. And therefore you can remember that you were aware in the morning. That's one of the reasons for the Chittamatra school to say what they say. But of course, that's not the only reason they accept this self-knower or this reflexive awareness. They say, well, everything needs to be known by another mind, and there need to be imprints of that mind that bring this object into existence. Okay, so they insist therefore on this reflexive type of this self-knower. And the Prasangika school says no, there's no such self-knower. And saying, for instance, as I already mentioned, so if there is an experience in the morning, seeing a chair, and then we remember it in the evening, anyway, if they're inherently different, you don't remember, you can't have, there's no connection between these different minds, since according to you, the Chittamatra school, they're inherently different. Okay, we had a lot of discussions on that, so no need to go into detail. But the Prasangika school then very nicely explains how memory is possible, using, of course, the explanation that's given by Shantideva, saying, well, we do remember that we saw a chair, or we know that we saw a chair in the morning. Why? Because the chair appeared to the mind, and although there's no self-knower, there's no other mind that necessarily knows that I saw a chair, or I see a chair right now. That is not, it can be another mindful kind of awareness that is aware, but even if my mindfulness is not active, it's not necessary for me to know later on when I see the chair. I also know that, well, when I remember the chair, I must have seen the chair. I just know this automatically, using the example of the venomous shrew, this venomous mouse, particular type of mouse or shrew with like a pointed nose. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's some kind of like a mouse-like being or rat-like being or animal that apparently it bites a hibernating. So the example that's given is a hibernating bear in a cave is sleeping and gets bitten by a rat. So is aware of getting bitten by the rat. Actually, let me just look at it because I'm getting confused about how it actually works. Gets bitten by the rat. Oh yeah. Is aware of the bite. Okay, is aware of the bite, but not aware of the poison entering. It's a venomous shrew. It's an venomous rat. So the poison entering his body. But when then he wakes up, the bear remembers that it was bitten, and knows therefore by implication, well, he was bitten. It was bitten by this particular poisonous animal, has some experience with that, and knows therefore it was infected. So this example being used in the same way we know an object, and we later on, just by association, by remembering this object, we know that we've known it. Okay, so we don't need another mind to help us to do that. All right. And that's how far we got with respect to the Chittamatra school itself. So here the self-knower being denied or being refuted. And then it goes on to say, what does the word only mean, therefore, when we say mind only? Okay, so that's verse 84. Starting with verse 84, it says in the 10 Ground Sutra, and not just that, also the Descent into Lanka Sutra, the text talks about there's only mind. So is that to be taken literally? And of course, no, it isn't. As we've had said in the beginning of today's session, that, well, it means that mind is primary. So according to the Prasangika school, the word only does not negate external existence, as the Chittamatra school asserts. It negates any other object other than the mind being mainly responsible for our experiences. So putting mind at the forefront, saying mind over everything, basically. So, but that doesn't mean the external phenomena don't exist. All right. Therefore, so external in the sense that, well, we say that there is still a creation of our own mind. So this is like the fine line. And we'll come to this in a moment, but well, before we get to that, but this idea that also the environment was created by our own mind, and still it exists external to our own mind. So that's the difficulty, how to really say it was created by our own mind. All right, but let's first, well, go to look at what was said before. So 84, 86, 87, 89, 88, no, 87, 88, up to then, it's this whole discussion. Well, the Buddha said it's only mind. Well, he did teach the mind only school, and said, but this was only to, oh, no, that comes later, sorry. No, with the word only, what he taught was, he was saying that there is no creator God. There is no eternal I, as some people may think. I think nowadays things have slightly changed, as in, well, there's less emphasis on a creator God, but just the environment. The environment has created everything. So the world around us is responsible also for our mind, for our body, for all our experiences, basically the material world. It seems the emphasis is more on that. In the past, in India, some of the philosophical systems, they would talk of, for instance, they had these ideas of some foundational principle out of which everything arises, or God, of course, or an eternal person, all these different ideas of with regard to what is the origin of things. Theistic religions, of course, like I said, it's God. Nowadays, you could say it's the environment. But the Buddhists say no, from a Buddhist point of view, it's the mind. It's mainly the mind. All right. So that is stressed here very much. And then one could argue, of course, when you say mind only, well, you're really saying primary mind only. So really, you should add that word. It's mainly mind only. I mean, like, the only thing that's primary, that's main, that's the main thing is the mind. So mind only is misleading. And then Chandrakirti says, if you just take the word Buddha, just take the Sanskrit word Buddha, really the word is meant to mean, it's supposed to mean to having awakened to suchness, or having blossomed, realized suchness. So the word Buddha actually can mean to awaken. So in the sense of awakening to suchness, to reality, if you like, or having blossomed, having realized suchness, having blossomed to, or having realized suchness. Well, the word Buddha actually, it's only implied. The word suchness is only implied. It's not part of the word Buddha. Unless you add Tattva Buddha, then it really means having awakened to suchness, or having blossomed to, having realized suchness. But just as the word Buddha actually really means having awakened to suchness, you only have the word Buddha. So a word is missing, if you like. It's only implied. It's left implicit. And then we have the Tibetan, for the Tibetan work. There's a similar explanation, don't need to go into it now. So likewise here, when you say mind only, it's left implicit. All right. And then verses 89 and 90, and this is the last, I'm going to say terms of the summary of what we've done so far, it stresses. Okay, so here we've got it. It stresses, and I think I went through it last time. So it is the mind, it says in 89, that constructed the vast diversity of both the domains. So these two domains, they're mentioned a lot. Less so in English, but in Tibetan, it's like a set term. Ne chu. So it says ne and chu, which kind of means the vessel and those within, if you like. So the vessel is like the world, like a vessel. They describe it like a vessel. And then chu as in like the beings within it. So these are the two domains of existence within samsara anyway. So talking about samsara here mainly, and the mind being primary, well, the both domains of sentient beings and their universe and their world as their universe, the environment. So the Buddha said that all beings are born of karma. There's no karma without the mind. And as I said before, one aspect is, of course, sentient beings, their own individual experiences are dependent mainly on their own karmic actions. And then as to the universe, the environment we live in, external environment, that is the result of our collective karma. Okay? So there's no karma without the world. And it goes on to say, even though matter does exist, it has no status of a creator like the mind. Matter does exist. External matter exists in verse 90. Although there is matter, of course there is external matter conventionally. It has no status of a creator like the mind. As nowadays, well, a lot of scientists definitely believe we are existent because there's matter. So what was first was one cell, and that has evolved into all these sentient beings. So it's not like mind is mainly responsible for having cells come together in a certain way. I mean, the idea in Buddhism is just the other way around. It's quite interesting, especially when I taught the second chapter of the Pramanavartika, it came up again and again. Is it the mind that created the body, or the body created the mind? Well, this idea in modern science, it's like, oh, it's our DNA that's responsible. So on a physical level, our parents' DNA, and then, well, the DNA we're given, and of course that changes a little, that DNA, as nowadays scientists know, but that affects our mind. That's, I guess the idea is really, that's why our mind acts in this way and that way and so forth. From a Buddhist point of view, in some cases, of course, that can be the case. But why did we get that DNA? Why did we get this DNA from our father and our mother? That was determined by our own mind, by, of course, the karmic forces that then determined which DNA I got from our parents. So it's not like this random kind of DNA strands and chromosomes coming together in this formation for, let's say, this child, and then for a sibling quite differently. No, that has to do with the mind. Therefore, the mind is responsible, where we were reborn, is responsible for the DNA we got. And of course, that DNA does affect the mind, but it's mainly the other way around. And this is why, for instance, and actually we do accept that to a certain degree. It's bizarre because no one has this idea that, for instance, when we do when there's this research on people meditating, there's a widespread research nowadays of people meditating. And what do scientists research? What do they investigate? How the brain has changed. The assumption is that there's a mental process that changes the brain. The assumption is not that there is a brain process called meditation, which then changes the mind. No one assumes that. For everyone, it's very clear and obvious that when there's research on how does meditation work, first there's a mental process, and that affects the mind. So therefore, our mind affects our brain. Our mind affects our brain. And like I said in the very beginning, and I said it last time as well, it's so beautiful if we really recognize that. It's such an incredible, it's like everything we wish for is found within our own mind. Everything we wish for can be achieved by our own mind. I mean, enlightenment is the ultimate achievement of that. But even within that now, and I said it at the end of last class, I said it that this is where so much freedom lies. I mean, where are we lacking freedom? We're lacking freedom in the sense that things happen to us that we don't want. All right. When do we feel like we have no freedom? When we don't get the things we want. When things happen to us we don't want. That's basically freedom is the definition of freedom. If you like, how do we label freedom on a situation? On something that we don't want when something happens. So, but everything we want can be achieved with this mind. We're not there yet. But the first step is to recognize it and then to act accordingly. And there are such beautiful examples, therefore, that even our brain can change. Of course, through meditation, one example, but every thought that we have, it changes our mind, it changes our body. And if they're positive thoughts, if you want to be a healthy person, well, by all means, work with your own mind. And again, for this coming week, it's so important. If you're a health nut, well, it's more important you work on your own mind than going jogging every day, if that's what you do to keep healthy. So, and there are beautiful examples. As I mentioned, one of my favorite examples is the example of these special nuns in the United States who traditionally are very active in the community and practice compassion. That's one of their main practices. Anyway, so these nuns, they're very active in their active compassion, if you like. And they also live to a very high age. They found that this group of nuns, that they live very, very, very long life. And I remember I read about this in an article. I haven't talked about it for so long, so I forget some of the details. But one of the eldest nuns in that group, she was approached by a neuroscientist, and he asked her, when she's passed away, would she donate her brain to science, because I want to find out what it is with these nuns? And she was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And so when she passed away, they actually got her brain and they analyzed it. They did some tests on it and checked it out. And she wasn't the only one. There were quite a few other nuns afterwards. And the amazing thing was that they found that these nuns, many of them had the symptoms for advanced Alzheimer, but none of them showed the symptoms. So as in, like, the brain had, I don't know, whichever protein it was that destroyed the brain, but mentally there were never any symptoms. They never showed, these symptoms they never manifested in the person themselves. They were, I don't know, fit as a fiddle, like they were so sharp and so forth. So to me, this is just, this is exactly what it says in the scriptures. It is mind over body. And if we learn to use this mind, if we learn to use this mind in such a way, well, such as these nuns, and they're not like the ordinary person that we meet on the street. They really put an effort into practicing active compassion, being active in the community, helping children, teaching them, and so forth. So if we use our mind in that way, well, why are we scared of Alzheimer? I mean, you can have Alzheimer and not even know about it. So then I don't care if my brain is totally destroyed by Alzheimer and I don't notice it. What do I care what my brain looks like? So the point is, therefore, that is so important to realize. We're doing this. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, generating compassion mainly benefits ourselves. It can benefit others. And hopefully that's our goal, that it benefits others. But it mainly benefits ourselves. And in the same way, getting angry, as the Buddha has said, getting angry is like eating poison and hoping that the other person dies, right? In the end, it's not going to do anything. I don't know whether the Buddha said it, but someone said the Buddha said it. I read it somewhere. Whether the Buddha said it or not, it's so true. So the point is, again, when we get angry, it harms ourselves. We may think, oh, I'm getting at this person, my anger, but it doesn't unless we act out on that anger. And even then we don't know whether we can really harm that person. It mainly harms ourselves. So we have to really internalize this. I mean, intellectually it makes sense and it sounds nice to say, oh, getting angry is like eating poison. You know, it sounds so nice, but we need to internalize it. We need to live accordingly to really utilize this incredible force of the mind. And so here, this is what it says, 89 and 90. that there are these two domains, the mind on one hand, well, no, our experiences on one hand, they are created by our own mind, but even the environment we live in, and that's harder. How is this environment? Of course, on an environmental basis, makes total sense. Of course, look around. I mean, all this pollution, yes, we've created that. That's pretty obvious. We're humans, of course. But we're not talking about just humans. We're talking about all sentient beings, including animals, including other beings we can't see. But even leaving them aside, because it's difficult to understand, but taking all the animals around us, it's our collective karma that we live in the environment we live in. All right. So forgetting about even in pollution and so forth, on that comes on top of it. And we are, as humans, of course, mainly responsible for that. But just the basics, that is also our own mind. Our own mind has created that. And of course, it doesn't exist independently of our own mind. We would say conventionally it exists externally, but it doesn't exist inherently, just as the mind doesn't exist inherently. It doesn't exist inherently either. So it's merely labeled as existing externally. Okay. Still, like I said before many, many times, of course, when we say the reality around us, it's the summary of each and every person's reality. There is no objective world out there. So it's not like our mind has created this objective world, because that's what it sounds like. Oh, our mind just created this mountain and those streams and so forth, as if they were objectively out there. How does a mind that's physical, that's non-physical, create those? Well, it does, but we need to understand that those objects, although they're physical, don't exist objectively. And this is where it's so difficult, because for us, external means over there, out there, this solid mountain, for instance. How can my mind create that? Well, it's not solidly, externally, objectively existent. Externally, yes, but only conventionally. And most importantly, it's merely labeled. Doesn't exist inherently, doesn't exist objectively. Anyway, this is why this is so difficult to understand. But as I said, verse 90, no. Oh yeah, so verse 89 before that. Could you see verse 89 again? Yeah. So for Buddha knew the mind that constructed, yeah, so both domains. Buddha said that all beings are born of karma. There's no karma without the mind. All right. Oh, someone just took away the time. I don't know how. I'm so sorry. I meant to. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got carried away. I don't believe it. It's already 23 minutes. Okay, said enough now. Okay. Well, we finished the summary. We finished some of the questions, and then next time I'll continue from where we got to last time. That was verse 90, I believe. And then the rest of the Chitta Matra school. So my apology, I got carried away. But let's meditate on exactly what I just said towards the end. Again, the importance of the mind and everything else. All right. So we may go a little bit over time today, a little bit longer, but it shouldn't be too bad. And of course, we start with a few moments of breathing. All right. So just focus on the breath for a few moments. So having studied the Chitta Matra school, Now it's important to understand the meaning of mind only according to the Prasangika. That the mind is the only aspect that is mainly responsible for our suffering and all our other experiences. It is the thoughts we have right now that determine our experiences in the future. But it's also our thoughts, our emotions, our inner world in general is responsible also for the future environment, future world we're going to find ourselves in. Therefore, who we will become and what world we live in is dependent on our present mind. The good news is that our mental consciousness is the one thing we can learn to totally control. To recognize our afflictive emotions, apply the antidotes to reducing them and eventually overcoming afflictive emotions. All of us have that ability. And since the nature of our mind is pure, since none of the negative emotions are in the nature of our mind, they can be removed. creating our own environment, of course, doesn't mean that there is an objective external world out there. But it's subjective. Conventionally existent external world. And reality is the summary of every living being's mental reality. And since we want to be happy and peaceful, we need to generate causes for those states of mind, which are love and compassion for ourselves and all others. So let's start to make a real change to our own life. To our future. Through internalizing this fact of the way to real peace and happiness. Love and compassion based on a realistic apprehension of reality. "24 hours a day. now to conclude whatever insight you've reached. Whatever feeling you've generated as a result of this analysis. Use single-pointed meditation to internalize it further, so that it affects you on a daily basis. And now let's also end with such a mind of love and compassion towards others, especially while dedicating all the positive potential that we accumulated today. May, of course, become one of many causes we need to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings, but at the same time also positive effect not just ourselves, but also the environment we live in, the world we live in, and those around us. May those who are sick, like Tali Lubin, get better soon. Those who have mental problems find peace and happiness. And in general affect the people around us to enhance their inner peace and their contentment. And of course, in the way Shantideva describes it. Can we have Shantideva's dedication prayer? Okay, thanks. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And most importantly, for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, great, thank you. So that was a little longer than expected. Next time we'll continue with verse 90. Please read ahead. And please don't forget your homework. Of course, it's bodhicitta. If you can, every day, as many times as you can, generate the mind of enlightenment. Of course, also briefly remembering why you want to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings, so driven by great compassion. And of course, be aware in the different situations in your daily life of the primary function of the mind, of how everything comes from the mind, was created by the mind, and will be created also in the future. Okay. And then have a great week.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you also, Dalit, for jumping this evening to the deep water for the first time. You did well, my friend. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank you so much,
week.
Geshe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe.
Have a good week.
Geshe. Thank you, Geshe.
Have a nice
Bye.
weekend, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.